3 weeks passed, and Danny began to settle into his new life. The fear of his classmates did not go away, but it became familiar. He learned to move carefully, to speak quietly, and to give others plenty of space. He learned which foods in the dining hall would not make him sick, and which ones he should avoid. He learned the layout of the station, the quickest routes between his quarters and his classrooms, and the quiet places where he could sit and read without drawing attention. Scylla remained his only real friend. She visited him almost every day, full of questions about Earth. Danny answered them patiently, though some of her questions surprised him. "Tell me about rain," she said one afternoon. They were sitting in the Academy Gardens, a large room filled with plants from a dozen different worlds. The air was warm and humid, filled with strange sweet smells. "Rain is water that falls from the sky," Danny explained. "Clouds form when water evaporates from oceans and lakes. When the clouds get heavy enough, the water falls back down." Scylla's heart beat faster. Water falls from the sky? Just falls? Without warning? Well, you can usually tell when it is coming. The sky gets dark, and the air feels different. But yes, sometimes it starts suddenly. "And you just walk through it? This falling water?" Danny nodded. "Sometimes I used to run home in the rain when I was a kid. It was fun." Scylla stared at him like he had described something impossibly dangerous. "Your world is terrifying," she whispered. Danny wanted to laugh, but he kept his expression calm. To him, rain was one of the gentle parts of Earth. He decided not to tell her about hurricanes or tornadoes yet. The days continued to pass. Danny attended his classes, studied in the library, and answered Scylla's endless questions. He began to think that maybe his time at the academy would be peaceful. Maybe the others would eventually get used to him. Maybe he could just be a student, nothing more. He was wrong. It happened on a quiet afternoon during Professor Yenix's xenobiology lecture. The classroom was filled with about 30 students, mostly Veloxi, with a few Koraths scattered among them. Danny sat in his usual spot in the back corner, trying to take up as little space as possible. Scylla sat beside him, her translator device recording the lecture for later review. Professor Yenix was discussing the biology of silicon-based life forms, drawing diagrams on the display board with his thin fingers. His voice was soft and patient, the voice of someone who truly loved teaching. Danny found himself enjoying the lecture despite his unfamiliarity with some of the concepts. Then the lights flickered. It was brief, just a moment of darkness before the power returned. Professor Yenix paused, looking up at the ceiling with a slight frown. The students murmured to each other, their translators creating a soft buzz of overlapping whispers. "Probably just a power fluctuation," the professor said, returning to his diagram. "The station is old. These things happen. Now, as I was saying, silicon-based organisms require very specific temperature ranges to maintain their molecular structure." Danny was not looking at the professor. He was looking at the ventilation grate in the ceiling. He had noticed it move, just slightly, just a small shift that could have been caused by air pressure or vibration. But something about it caught his attention. Something about it felt wrong. Danny had grown up on Earth. His ancestors had spent millions of years learning to recognize danger, learning to notice the small signs that something was not right. That instinct had been passed down through countless generations, written into human genes by the cruel mathematics of survival. Those who did not died. Danny noticed danger now. He sat up straighter in his seat, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. Beside him, Scylla glanced at him with confusion. "Danny, what is wrong?" Before he could answer, the grate exploded inward. A shape dropped from the ceiling, landing in the center of the classroom with a heavy thud that shook the floor. Desks scattered. Students screamed, their voices high and thin with terror. The creature that stood before them was like nothing Danny had seen at the academy. It was tall, nearly 7 feet, with gray skin that looked like rough stone. It had 4 arms, each one ending in a hand with long fingers, tipped with claws that gleamed like polished metal. Its face was flat and broad, with small dark eyes and a mouth full of teeth that were clearly designed for tearing flesh. Danny recognized the species from his studies. Drexian, a race of hunters and killers, banned from civilized space for their violent ways. They worked as mercenaries, assassins, and pirates. They were feared throughout the galaxy. The Drexian smiled, showing all of those terrible teeth. "Hello, little ones," it said. Its voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together. "My name is Crix. I am here for the professor." The classroom had become a scene of chaos. Veloxy students were collapsing at their desks, their thin bodies going limp as their fear response overwhelmed their nervous systems. It was an automatic survival mechanism, Danny remembered from his studies. When faced with a threat they could not escape, Veloxy bodies simply shut down, hoping the predator would lose interest in prey that did not move. The Korath were clicking frantically, their vibrations filling the air with desperate signals. They were trying to call for help, but the walls of the classroom blocked their communications. The station's security systems should have detected the intrusion, but nothing happened. No alarms sounded. No guards came rushing in. Crix had planned this well. Professor Yenix stood frozen at the front of the classroom. His 3 hearts were visible through his pale chest, all of them beating wildly. His thin body trembled like a leaf in a storm. He tried to speak, but only a weak sound came from his mouth. "You owe a debt, Professor," Crix said, walking toward him with slow, heavy steps. "A powerful person wants you dead. I am here to collect." Danny watched the scene unfold. Around him, his classmates were unconscious or paralyzed with fear. Scylla had slid beneath her desk, her body shaking so badly that Danny could hear her thin bones rattling. Her 3 hearts were beating in a panicked rhythm that could not be healthy. The classroom doors were sealed. The emergency locks had engaged when Crix entered, trapping everyone inside. There was no escape. No help was coming. Danny looked at the Drexian assassin. He looked at his terrified classmates. He looked at Professor Yenix, who was about to die. And something inside Danny shifted. He had spent 3 weeks trying to be small, trying to be harmless, trying to make everyone forget what he was. He had moved carefully and spoken softly, and pretended that he was not what his planet had made him. But he was what his planet had made him. He was human. He was a child of Earth, a world that killed the weak and rewarded the strong. His ancestors had hunted and been hunted. They had fought against creatures with claws and teeth and horns. They had survived ice ages and plagues and wars. They had clawed their way to the top of the food chain through sheer stubborn refusal to die. Danny was not a killer. He did not want to hurt anyone. But he was also not prey. He stood up. The movement was calm, unhurried. He did not scramble to his feet or jump up in panic. He simply rose from his seat like a person standing up to stretch. His gray eyes fixed on Crix, steady and unafraid. The Drexian stopped walking. He turned toward Danny, his small dark eyes narrowing. For a moment, they simply looked at each other across the classroom. Crix had killed many creatures in his long career. He had hunted across dozens of worlds, taking contracts that other assassins refused. He had killed politicians and merchants, soldiers and scientists. He had never failed a job. He had never met anything that truly frightened him. Until now. The human stood calmly in the back of the classroom, watching him with those strange gray eyes. There was no fear in those eyes, no panic, no desperate hope for rescue. There was only a cool, steady attention that reminded Crix of something he could not quite name. And then the human smiled. Crix felt a chill run through his body. He had seen many species smile, and he knew that for most of them it was a sign of happiness or friendship. But this smile was different. This smile showed teeth. Humans were hunters. Crix remembered that fact now. On their world, showing teeth was what predators did before they attacked. "You should run, Deathworlder," Crix growled, extending his claws. Each claw was 6 inches long, sharp enough to cut through metal. "I have no quarrel with you. Step aside, and I will let you live." The human did not step aside. Instead, he began walking forward, moving between the desks with slow, steady steps. His movements were relaxed, almost casual. He walked like someone taking a morning stroll, not someone facing an armed killer. "You know," the human said, his voice light and conversational, "back on Earth, we have animals kind of like you. We call them mantises. They are insects, about this big." He held up his hand, showing a space of about 4 inches between his thumb and finger. "They have arms that fold like yours, with sharp edges for catching prey. Pretty little things, actually. Dangerous, too, in their own way." Crix snarled. "You compare me to an insect?" "No," the human replied, still walking closer. "I am just saying that on my world, children catch them in jars for fun. They keep them as pets. Sometimes the mantis tries to fight, but it does not really matter. The child is always bigger, always stronger, always in control." The human stopped walking. He was now standing in the open space between the rows of desks, about 15 feet from Crix. His hands hung loose at his sides. He made no move to defend himself or attack. Crix studied the human carefully. The creature was smaller than him, weaker than him. Humans had no natural weapons, no claws, no fangs, no venom. Their skin was soft and easily torn. Their bones broke more easily than a Drexian's. By every measure, the human should be easy prey. But Crix had survived this long by trusting his instincts, and his instincts were screaming at him now. Something about this human was wrong. Something about the way he stood, the way he moved, the way he watched. This was not the behavior of prey. "You are brave," Crix admitted, "or perhaps just stupid. But bravery and stupidity both end the same way." He raised one clawed hand, with blood on the floor. The human's smile widened slightly. "Maybe. But whose blood?" Under her desk, Scylla watched through eyes blurred with tears. Her body was shaking so badly she could barely see, but she could not look away. Her friend was going to die. Danny was going to die, and there was nothing she could do about it. She did not understand why he was not afraid. She did not understand how anyone could face a Drexian assassin and smile. Her entire species had evolved to flee from danger, to shut down when escape was impossible, to hope that stillness would save them. Fear was their first response to everything threatening. But Danny did not seem to know how to be afraid. Or maybe he knew, but he did not let it control him. Professor Yenix had pressed himself against the display board, his 3 hearts beating so fast they had begun to blur together into a single rapid pulse. He watched the human student with something that might have been wonder mixed with his terror. In all his years of studying alien species, he had never seen anything like this. He had read about human courage in academic papers, but he had thought it was exaggeration, mythology created by a species that wanted to seem more impressive than it was. Now he saw that the papers had not exaggerated. If anything, they had understated the truth. Danny kept his eyes on Crix, watching for the small movements that would signal an attack. His father had taught him this when he was young. During the summers they spent camping in the wilderness. "Watch the shoulders," his father had said. "Watch the weight shift. An animal always tells you when it is going to move. You just have to know how to read the signs." Danny could read the signs now. He saw Crix's weight shift onto his back legs. He saw the muscles in those gray shoulders tighten. He saw the slight turn of the head that would give power to the coming strike. I am going to kill your professor, Crick said, and then I am going to leave. You can try to stop me if you want. It will be the last mistake you ever make. Danny tilted his head slightly, like a dog hearing an interesting sound. You know what the problem is with being an assassin? You get used to killing things that cannot fight back. Soft targets, easy prey. You spend so long hunting the weak that you forget what it feels like to face something dangerous. And you think you are dangerous, little human? Danny laughed. It was a quiet sound, gentle almost. But there was something underneath it that made Crick's claws twitch. I think I come from a planet where everything tries to kill you. Where the weather kills you. Where the animals kill you. Where the water and the plants and even the air can kill you if you are not careful. I think my species survived that world for millions of years. I think we did not survive by being soft or scared or weak. He took another step forward. I think you have no idea what you are dealing with. The classroom was silent now, except for the soft sounds of the unconscious Veloxy breathing. Even the Korath had stopped their frantic clicking, watching the confrontation with their compound eyes. They had never seen anything like this. No one had. Crix made his decision. The human was clearly insane, some sort of defective specimen that did not know when to be afraid. It did not matter. Insane or not, the creature was still made of flesh and bone. It would die like everything else. He attacked. Crix was fast, faster than anything his size had a right to be. His forearms moved in a blur, claws cutting through the air from different angles. It was his signature technique, the one that had killed so many targets. No creature could block 4 attacks at once. No creature could even see all 4 coming. But Danny was not trying to block. He moved. The first claw passed through the space where his head had been a fraction of a second earlier. He ducked under it, his body dropping low with a fluid grace that spoke of practiced muscle memory. The second claw swept toward his chest, but he was already spinning, turning his body sideways, so the blade passed harmlessly by. The third and fourth claws came together like scissors, meant to trap him between them, but Danny was no longer there. He had stepped inside the reach of those deadly arms, close enough to smell the sour scent of Drexian sweat, close enough to strike. His elbow drove into a spot just below Crix's middle arm, hitting a cluster of nerves that Danny had read about in his xenobiology textbook. The Drexian let out a sound that was half roar and half scream. His left arms went limp, hanging uselessly at his side. That is what we call a pressure point, Danny said calmly. Your species has 7 of them. I have been studying. Crix stumbled backward, shocked. No one had ever touched him in combat before. No one had ever been fast enough, skilled enough, brave enough. And this soft little human had done it in less than a second. For the first time in many years, Crix felt something he had almost forgotten. He felt afraid. The fight lasted 47 seconds. Later, when security teams reviewed the footage from the classroom cameras, they would watch those 47 seconds over and over again. They would slow them down, freeze individual frames, analyze every movement with scientific precision. They would write reports that would be shared across military academies and security agencies throughout the galaxy. But in the moment, it was not science. It was violence. Crix recovered from his shock quickly. He was a professional, and professionals did not let surprise paralyze them. His left arms were useless now, hanging limp at his sides, but he still had 2 working arms with perfectly sharp claws. He had killed with less. He lunged at Danny, abandoning technique for raw aggression. His claws slashed in wild arcs, trying to cut the human apart through sheer volume of attacks. If he could not land a precise strike, he would fill the air with so many blades that the human would have nowhere to dodge. Danny dodged anyway. He moved like water, like smoke, like something that was never quite where the claws expected him to be. Each attack missed by inches, sometimes by less. But inches were enough. Danny flowed around the slashing claws, ducking and weaving and spinning, with a grace that seemed almost impossible for a species so solid and heavy. It was not magic. It was not some supernatural ability. It was simply the result of millions of years of evolution and thousands of hours of practice. Humans had learned to fight long before they invented weapons. They had wrestled with bears and lions and wolves. They had developed styles of combat that used the body as a tool, turning the natural movements of joints and muscles into techniques that could disable or kill. Over thousands of years, they had refined these techniques, passed them down through generations, studied them with the same dedication they brought to everything else. Danny had started learning to fight when he was 6 years old. His father had enrolled him in classes at the local community center, thinking it would help the shy boy build confidence. Danny had discovered that he had a talent for it. He was not the strongest or the fastest, but he had good instincts and excellent balance. More importantly, he enjoyed the challenge. He had kept practicing throughout his childhood and teenage years. By the time he left for the academy, he held advanced ranks in 3 different fighting styles. He had never used his skills in a real fight before today. He had hoped he never would. But his body remembered what his conscious mind had tried to forget. His muscles moved without thought, responding to Crix's attacks with the automatic precision of deeply trained reflexes. Crix swung high. Danny ducked low, letting the claw pass over his head, and drove his fist into the Drexian's knee. Something cracked. Crix stumbled, his legs suddenly unable to support his weight properly. Crix slashed down. Danny stepped sideways and grabbed the descending arm, using the assassin's own momentum to pull him off balance. Before Crix could recover, Danny's elbow struck another nerve cluster, and the third arm went limp. Now Crix had only one working limb. His left arms were paralyzed. His right leg was damaged. His breathing was heavy and ragged, filled with pain and growing fear. "Stop," Crix gasped. "Stop. I yield. I yield." Danny did not stop. He had learned something else in his years of training. He had learned that when you fought someone who truly wanted to hurt you, you did not stop until the fight was over. You did not trust surrender. You did not believe in mercy until your opponent was physically unable to continue. His father had taught him this during a camping trip when Danny was 14. They had encountered a wounded bear, and his father had explained that a wounded animal was more dangerous than a healthy one. Never assume the fight is over until you are certain. Always finish what you start. Danny finished what he started. He caught Crix's last working arm mid-swing, twisted it sharply, and felt the joint pop out of its socket. Crix screamed, a high, terrible sound that echoed through the sealed classroom. Danny released the arm and let the assassin fall. Crix collapsed onto the floor, all 4 arms now useless, his leg bent at an angle that suggested serious damage. He lay among the scattered desks, gasping and whimpering like a wounded animal. Danny stood over him, breathing only slightly harder than normal. There was no triumph in his expression, no pleasure in his victory. There was only the same calm steadiness he had shown throughout the fight. "Here is something they probably did not tell you about humans," Danny said quietly, leaning close to the assassin's face. "We are not survivors because our planet is dangerous. We are survivors because we are the most dangerous thing on it. Everything else learned to fear us. Predators that used to hunt our ancestors became prey themselves. We drove them extinct, one after another, until there was nothing left that dared to challenge us." He reached down and picked up one of Crix's fallen claws, a trophy that had broken off during the fight. He examined it casually, turning it over in his fingers. "Your claws are impressive," Danny continued. "On my world, there were creatures with claws like these: saber-toothed cats, dire wolves, giant bears, all of them bigger than you, all of them more experienced hunters. My ancestors killed them all, not with claws of our own, not with fangs or venom, with brains and tools and sheer stubborn refusal to die. He dropped the claw onto Crix's chest. You came here thinking you were the predator. You were wrong. You were always wrong. The classroom was slowly returning to life. Some of the unconscious Veloxi were beginning to stir, their bodies recovering from the fear response. The Korath had started clicking again, soft sounds of amazement and disbelief. Professor Yenix was still pressed against the wall, but his 3 hearts had slowed to something approaching a normal rhythm. Danny looked up at the professor. Someone should probably call security now. Yenix blinked several times, as if waking from a dream. Then he moved, hurrying to the communication panel by the door. His thin fingers trembled as he activated the emergency channel. Security, he said, his voice shaking. We need security in classroom 7. There has been an incident. Danny turned away from the fallen assassin and walked back toward his desk. Scylla was still hiding underneath it, her 3 hearts visible through her pale blue skin, all of them racing. He crouched down beside her, moving slowly and carefully so as not to frighten her further. It is over, he said gently. You are safe now. Scylla stared at him with wide, wet eyes. You defeated him. A Drexian assassin. You defeated him with your hands. Yes. How? How is that possible? You are just a human? Danny smiled, being careful not to show too many teeth. I know. That is what I have been trying to tell everyone. We are not as scary as people think. We are just very good at surviving. Scylla was silent for a long moment. Then slowly, she crawled out from under the desk. Her body was still trembling, but she forced herself to stand. She looked at Danny, really looked at him, as if seeing him for the first time. No, she said quietly, you are exactly as scary as people think, maybe more, but you are also kind. You saved Professor Yenix. You saved all of us. Danny did not know what to say to that, so he just nodded. Security arrived 3 minutes later. They found the classroom in chaos, the students slowly recovering, and a professional Drexian assassin lying broken on the floor. They found Professor Yenix, alive and unharmed. And they found a human student sitting calmly at his desk, waiting to give his statement. The questions would come later, the investigations and interviews and endless reports. But for now, Danny Carter sat in silence and watched as medics carried Crix away. The news spread faster than light. Within hours of the incident, the story had reached every corner of the station. By the next day, it was being discussed on worlds dozens of light years away. Within a week, it had become the most talked-about event in the galactic news networks. Human student defeats Drexian assassin with bare hands. That was the headline that appeared on thousands of screens across the galaxy. Deathworlder saves classroom of students from professional killer. Human demonstrates why his species is feared throughout the cosmos. The security footage leaked, as it always did. Someone copied the files and sold them to a news agency who paid a fortune for the exclusive rights. Then copies of the copies appeared on underground networks, spreading until anyone who wanted to see the fight could watch it. And everyone wanted to see it. Danny watched his own fame grow with a mixture of embarrassment and discomfort. He had not asked for any of this. He had simply done what needed to be done when there was no one else to do it. Now he was being treated like some kind of hero, and he did not know how to feel about it. The Academy tried to return to normal, but normal was impossible now. Every species that visited the station wanted to see the human who had beaten a Drexian. Diplomats and journalists and curious tourists found excuses to pass by Danny's classroom, hoping to catch a glimpse of the famous Deathworlder. Students who had been afraid to look at him now stared openly. Their fear transformed into something that might have been admiration. Professor Yenix held a special meeting with Danny 3 days after the incident. The elderly Veloxi was still visibly shaken, his movements slower and more careful than before. But there was something new in his eyes when he looked at Danny, something that might have been gratitude mixed with wonder. "I owe you my life," Yenix said simply. "I do not know how to repay such a debt." Danny shook his head. "You do not owe me anything, Professor. I just did what anyone would have done." Yenix was quiet for a moment. Then he let out a small, soft laugh. "No, Danny. That is exactly what anyone would not have done. Every other species in that room, including myself, was paralyzed with fear. You were the only one who could move, the only one who could fight. That is not normal. That is something unique to your kind." "It is just how we are," Danny said, uncomfortable with the praise. "We do not think about it. When something needs to be done, we do it. Fear is just a feeling. It tells you that something is dangerous, but it does not get to make decisions for you." Yenix considered this for a long time. "That is the most terrifying thing anyone has ever said to me, and also, perhaps, the most beautiful." The investigation into Crix's attack revealed that the assassin had been hired by a criminal organization that Professor Yenix had testified against years ago. Security networks across the station were upgraded. New protocols were put in place. Crix himself was taken away to face trial for attempted murder and numerous other charges. Danny tried not to think about him. He tried not to think about the sound of breaking bones, the screams of pain, the feeling of his own strength being used to hurt another living thing. He had never wanted to be a fighter. He had come to the academy to learn, not to demonstrate why his species was feared. But some things could not be undone. Scylla found him in the garden one evening, sitting alone among the strange alien plants. Her approach was different now, less hesitant than before. She still showed signs of nervousness, her 3 hearts beating a little faster than normal. But she no longer trembled when she came near him. "May I sit with you?" she asked. Danny nodded, and she settled onto the bench beside him. They sat in silence for a while, watching the artificial sunset that the station's systems projected through the transparent ceiling. "The others are talking about you," Scylla said eventually. "Not just here, but everywhere. Across the whole galaxy." "I know," Danny replied. "I wish they would stop." "They will not stop. You have become a symbol, proof that everything they believed about humans is true." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "Some of them are more afraid of humans now than they were before. Others are less afraid. They see that you used your strength to protect the weak, not to prey upon them." Danny sighed. "I am just a person, Scylla. I am not a symbol of anything." "You do not get to choose what you symbolize," she said gently. "None of us do. We are all representatives of our species, whether we want to be or not. You just happen to represent a species that the rest of the galaxy cannot stop thinking about." Danny turned to look at her. His friend, his first real friend in this strange place so far from home. She was still small and fragile, still vulnerable in ways he could never fully understand. But she had grown braver since they met. She sat beside a Deathworlder without flinching now. She looked into his eyes without fear. "How do you do it?" Scylla asked suddenly. "Do what?" "Stay calm. Even during the fight, even when you should have been terrified, you were calm. Your heart rate barely changed. I watched the recording. I saw the biomonitor readings. How is that possible?" Danny thought about the question for a long time before answering. "I was afraid," he admitted. "I was very afraid." A fear is just information. It tells you that something dangerous is happening, something that needs your attention. It does not tell you what to do about it. It does not make decisions for you. You do that yourself. Scylla's hearts beat faster. For my species, fear is everything. When we are afraid, our bodies shut down. We cannot fight. We cannot even run. We just stop and hope the danger passes. I know, Danny said. I read about that. It made me sad. Why? Because you cannot protect yourselves. Because you have to rely on others to keep you safe. He looked up at the artificial stars glowing through the ceiling. Humans evolved differently. We had to fight for our survival every single day. Fear was useful, because it told us when to pay attention. But if we let it control us, we died. So we learned to feel the fear, and then set it aside. We learned to act even when we were terrified. Scylla was quiet, absorbing this information. Then she said something that surprised him. Can you teach me? Teach you what? To be brave. To feel the fear without letting it control me. She looked at him with her large, pale eyes. I do not want to be helpless anymore. I do not want to collapse every time something scary happens. Can you teach me to be more like you? Danny felt something warm spread through his chest. It was pride, maybe, or hope. He had spent 3 weeks being feared and avoided, treated like a monster, just because of where he came from. Now here was someone asking him to share the best parts of being human, not the violence or the danger, but the courage. I do not know if I can, he said honestly. Your biology is different from mine. Your brain works differently. What works for humans might not work for Veloxi. I want to at least try. Danny smiled, carefully keeping his teeth covered. Then we will try together. Word of their arrangement spread through the academy. Others began to approach Danny, asking similar questions. Korath, who wanted to understand human resilience. Veloxi, who dreamed of controlling their fear response. Species from worlds Danny had never heard of. All of them curious about the psychological techniques that allowed humans to function under pressure. Danny was not a teacher. He did not have special training in these things. He only knew what his parents and his teachers and his experience had shown him. But he shared what he could, and slowly, carefully, he began to build something new. A reputation not for violence, but for courage. Not for being dangerous, but for helping others become strong. The incident in the classroom had changed everything. Danny would never be just a student again. He would always be the human who had proven what his species can do. But maybe that was not such a bad thing. Maybe there were worse things to be remembered for than protecting the innocent and teaching bravery to those who had never known it. As he watched the artificial stars with Scylla beside him, Danny Carter allowed himself to feel something he had not felt since arriving at the station. He felt like he belonged. The space station called Harmony 7 floated in the dark emptiness between 3 star systems. It was old, built long before humans had learned to travel between worlds. For hundreds of years, it had served as a place of learning. The Galactic Academy of Interspecies Relations welcomed students from dozens of planets. They came to study, to learn about each other, and to build friendships that would keep the peace between their worlds. Danny Carter had arrived 3 weeks ago. He was 22 years old, born in a small town in Ohio, on a planet called Earth. He had brown hair that he never quite managed to keep neat, and calm gray eyes that seemed to notice everything around him. He was not tall by human standards, standing just under 6 feet, but here on Harmony 7, he towered over most of his classmates. The Academy had welcomed many species over the centuries. It had never welcomed a human before. Danny remembered his first day clearly. He had stepped off the transport ship into the main arrival hall, carrying a single bag over his shoulder. The hall was filled with beings of all shapes and sizes. Some floated, some crawled, some walked on 2 legs, others on 4 or 6 or more. The noise of 100 different languages filled the air, translated into soft whispers by the devices everyone wore. And then someone had seen him. The word spread like fire through dry grass. Human. There is a human here, a Deathworlder. Danny had watched as the crowd parted before him. Creatures who had been talking and laughing fell silent. They pressed themselves against the walls, giving him a wide path to walk through. Some of them trembled. A few of the smaller ones ran away entirely. He had not understood it then. He was just a student. He had come to learn about alien biology because he found it interesting. He was not a soldier or a fighter. He had never hurt anyone in his life. But to the rest of the galaxy, he was something else entirely. He was a human, and humans came from Earth. Earth was what the galactic community called a death world. The term sounded dramatic to Danny, but he had learned what it meant to others. Earth had a gravity that would crush the bones of most species. Its atmosphere contained a gas called oxygen that was poisonous to many forms of life. The planet was covered in water that fell from the sky without warning. Its temperature swung from burning heat to freezing cold, depending on the season and location. Massive storms tore across its surface. The ground itself sometimes shook and split open. Mountains exploded with liquid fire. And then there were the creatures. Earth was filled with predators, animals with claws and teeth that hunted and killed. Poisonous insects that could stop a heart with a single sting. Fish with rows of sharp teeth that smelled blood from miles away. Even the plants were dangerous, some of them producing poisons that could kill in minutes. Humans had not just survived on this world, they had conquered it. They had risen to the top of the food chain on a planet that seemed designed to kill everything that lived on it. They had done this without natural weapons, without claws or fangs or venom. They had done it with their minds, their tools, and their refusal to give up. To the rest of the galaxy, this made humans terrifying. Danny found this reputation exhausting. He was not terrifying. He liked reading books and watching old movies. He enjoyed cooking simple meals and taking long walks. He had come to the academy because he was curious about the universe, not because he wanted to scare anyone. But the fear followed him everywhere. His classmates were mostly Veloxi and Korath. The Veloxi were thin and delicate, with skin so pale and thin that Danny could see their organs through it. They had 3 hearts that beat in a visible rhythm beneath their chests. They were brilliant scholars, known across the galaxy for their contributions to science and philosophy. They were also fragile. A fall that would bruise Danny could kill a Veloxi. The Korath were tall insectoids with hard shells and multiple limbs. They communicated through vibrations that Danny felt more than heard, though his translator device converted these into words he could understand. They were peaceful by nature, preferring meditation and careful thought over conflict. Neither species had ever produced warriors. Neither had ever needed to. They came from worlds where the greatest dangers were solved through cooperation and careful planning. Violence was something they read about in history books, a primitive behavior that civilized species had left behind long ago. Then they met Danny, and they remembered that some species had not left violence behind. Some species still carried it in their blood and bones, written into their very nature by millions of years of survival. Professor Yenix taught xenobiology, which was the study of alien life forms. He was an elderly Veloxi, his pale skin marked with the darker patches that came with age. His 3 hearts beat slowly now, a sign of his many years. He was kind and patient, genuinely interested in helping his students learn. He was also clearly afraid of Danny. The professor tried to hide it. He smiled when Danny entered the classroom. He answered Danny's questions with the same care he showed other students. But Danny noticed how Yenix kept the desk between them. He noticed how the professor's hearts beat faster whenever Danny stood up or moved suddenly. Danny pretended not to notice. It seemed like the polite thing to do. Most of his classmates kept their distance, They sat on the far side of the classroom. They chose different tables in the dining hall. They walked the other direction when they saw him coming down a corridor. Danny understood their fear, even if he did not share it. He tried to move slowly and speak softly. He tried to seem as harmless as possible. It did not help much. But there was one exception. Her name was Scylla. Scylla was a young Veloxi, barely 20 years old by the Galactic Standard Calendar. She was smaller than most of her species, with skin that had a slight blue tint that Danny found rather pretty. Her 3 hearts were strong and healthy, beating in a quick rhythm that sped up whenever she was excited about something. He could see it in the way her hearts raced when he came near, in the slight trembling of her thin fingers. But she was also curious, and her curiosity was stronger than her fear. On his 5th day at the academy, she had sat down next to him in the dining hall. Danny had looked up from his meal, surprised. No one had voluntarily come within 10 feet of him since he arrived. "You are the human," Scylla had said. It was not a question. "Yes," Danny had replied carefully, keeping his voice soft. "I am Danny. I am Scylla." Her hearts were beating so fast he worried she might faint. "I have questions about your world. Many questions. Will you answer them?" Danny had smiled, and Scylla had flinched at the sight of his teeth. He quickly closed his mouth, remembering that showing teeth was a threat display for most species. "Sorry," he said, "and yes, I will answer your questions. As many as you want." That had been the beginning of their friendship.